Imagine you are a 20-year-old doughboy embarking from New York in 1918 for the Great War in Europe. You're dreaming of glory on the poppy-strewn fields of France in your imagination, and then you find yourself shivering in a frozen trench at the Russian Arctic Circle with no idea why you're there. This was the reality of the Polar Bear Expedition. Near the end of World War I, the Entente allies of Great Britain, France, and the US decided to intervene in the Russian Civil War. They did not go to aid an ally as the Bolsheviks had already taken the country and killed the Tsar. Rather, they were concerned with war material that had been destined for the Eastern Front before its collapse, and the stranded Czech Legion, a unit that was originally intended to fight against Austria-Hungary in World War I before becoming embroiled in the Russian Civil War. In addition, several government officials expressed concerns about communism. The US sent a token force to northern Russia, with an additional force landing in Vladivostok, the eastern Russian port on the Sea of Japan. The Polar Bear Expedition included the 339th Infantry Regiment, which was mostly populated by draftees from Michigan. It was believed that these men, used to the cold winters around the Great Lakes, would be better equipped to deal with the deep freeze of a Russian winter. Other units were the 310th Engineers, 337th Ambulance Company, and 337th Field Hospital for a force of approximately 5,000. They disembarked at Archangel in September 1918 to find the Bolsheviks had removed the supplies left behind by the collapse of the Russian Empire and its withdrawal from the Great War. The unit was quickly hustled into the surrounding forests. They would only encounter the enemy over a week later, during which an officer mistook a plane for one of their allies and ran forward shouting, "Don't fire, we are Americans." He was promptly killed, and from then on, every time they came across the enemy, they would be greeted by the mocking calls of, "Don't fire, we are Americans." Matters were not helped by the starving civilian populace, refugees, and a coup against the local government. Chaplin, a Russian naval officer and anti-communist, used the landings to kidnap the officials of Archangel and sent them off by steamer to a monastery. The Entente officials had to bring them back. This did little to dampen local resentment and fear that foreigners were going to take over Russia. The force pushed inland after that to reach the railway line. The Czech Legion and White Russian forces were to meet them at Vologda, 300 miles south of Archangel. From there, they would re-establish the Eastern Front. They moved 35 miles a day through marshes, tundra, and forests. Medical supplies were stretched thin, and many were deathly ill with Spanish flu. They never reached Vologda. By winter, they had taken Seltzow on the Dvina River, about 187 miles from Archangel. It was the furthest they would ever get. The supply chain only worsened. The expedition and the state of Archangel spawned numerous get-rich-quick schemes. Medical supplies remained scarce, but thousands of cases of Scottish whiskey flowed. Soldiers grew suspicious of the supply company, and one man even stole and resold sugar. After he was arrested, it was discovered he'd made $89,000. During this time, the Soviet government didn't view the expedition as anything more than an annoying, persistent fly at the dinner table. They were too busy focusing on the White Russian forces that fall. That soon changed. Leon Trotsky, who had sanctioned the initial landing, came to the conclusion that the Allies were attempting to dismantle what Lenin built and vowed to throw them back into the White Sea. The war now mimicked the Western Front, with fighting over the same ground and the digging of trenches. The winter brought no respite, and the Red Russians were now on the offensive. In the rest of the world, Armistice Day came and went. The Great War was over, but the fighting in northern Russia continued. The Americans were forced to retreat back north during the winter offensive. They never linked with the Czech Legion, which managed to fight its way to Vladivostok in eastern Russia. They were there in time to greet the American and French forces as they docked. While the Polar Bear Expedition continued to lose ground, people back in the United States had taken to writing Congress asking why they were still over there when World War I had ended. The newspapers joined in with editorials. Representatives then raised the issue in the Capitol. However, it would take time to send word and extract the expeditionary force, and the northern ports had already frozen over by November. There was nothing that could be done immediately. By early 1919, battered and frozen, the force whispered of mutiny. Sparks flew when complaints and petitions moved from company to company. While only one corporal, Earl Metcalf, was against mutiny, the rebellion quickly fizzled out. As the soldiers had no idea what punishment mutiny entailed, they decided to take their chances against Bolshevik guns. Though newspapers did report that Company I mutinied later in March, it appears more likely that officers called a meeting to answer soldiers' questions, and frustration gave way to yelling. However, no mutiny actually occurred. It didn't really matter in the end. A few weeks after the talk of mutiny, the US government came to a conclusion and began planning to remove its troops from the disastrous Russian campaign. An ice-breaking ship arrived on April 17, 1919 for the withdrawal. A British force of 8,000 relieved the remaining Americans who set sail for Brest, France, and then New York City in June. On July 15, 1919, it was reported that 46 officers and 1,495 men of the Polar Bear expedition were the first American troops to return home. The expeditionary force was officially disbanded on August 5, 1919, after suffering over 200 casualties, many of whom remained lost in the taiga and permafrost. In 1920, Polar Bear veterans began lobbying their state and federal governments to obtain funds and the necessary approvals to retrieve the bodies of at least 125 of their fellow soldiers left behind in Russia. By 1929, additional research found that 226 fallen polar bears had originally been buried in North Russia. Over the next 14 years, they found and retrieved the remains of 212. Some were reburied near a polar bear memorial in Troy, Michigan, and the last veteran died in 2003. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, leave a like and subscribe. There's always more history.